Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. This is the story of how my entitled neighbor thought she could fraudulently sell my property right out from under me, and how I made sure she learned exactly why you don't mess with a man's home. Let me start by giving you some background. My name is OP, and I'm in my late 30s. About 3 years ago, I inherited my grandparents' ranch after spending most of my 20s burning out in the tech industry. This place has been in our family for 3 generations. My great-grandfather bought the land back in the 1940s when it was still pretty cheap. It's not huge by Texas standards, just about 200 acres, but it's beautiful rolling hills with a creek running through it and enough pasture for a small herd of cattle. I have some of my best childhood memories on this ranch. Every summer, my parents would drop me off here for weeks at a time. My grandfather taught me how to ride, how to mend fences, and how to respect the land. He used to say that owning land wasn't just about having property. It was about being a steward for future generations. When he passed away and left me the ranch, I knew exactly what I had to do. I quit my tech job, sold my city apartment, and moved out here full-time. It's been the best decision I ever made. I've got about 30 head of cattle, 3 horses, and more peace and quiet than I ever thought possible. The house isn't fancy. It's the same 2-story farmhouse my great-grandfather built, but it's solid and comfortable. The barns are older but well-maintained, and the fences are sturdy even if they're not the prettiest things to look at. Now, about 18 months ago, the property next to mine got sold. It's much smaller than my ranch, maybe 15 acres, but it came with a fancy modern house that some city folks had built as a weekend place. The new owners were a couple in their 50s who just retired from some big city up north. The husband seemed okay, kept to himself mostly, but the wife was something else entirely. I'll call her Karen because that's exactly the kind of person she was. From day one, Karen made it clear that she had opinions about how I was running my ranch. She'd stand at our property line and make comments about how my pastures looked unkempt because I wasn't mowing them like a suburban lawn. She complained that my cattle were too close to the fence line, even though they were nowhere near her property. She even had the nerve to suggest I should paint my barns to improve the neighborhood aesthetic. I tried to be polite at first. I explained that pastures are supposed to look natural, that cattle need access to different areas for grazing, and that the weathered look of my barns was part of the authentic ranch character. But Karen wasn't interested in understanding how a working ranch operates. She wanted everything to look like some country club fantasy she had in her head. Things got worse when she started talking about property values. Karen was obsessed with the idea that my ranch was somehow dragging down the value of her place. She'd mention how much they'd paid for their house and how they expected the area to develop properly. I got the impression she thought my ranch should be turned into a subdivision or something equally ridiculous. The complaints escalated over the months. Karen would call the county about various supposed violations, claiming my fences were in disrepair, that my cattle were creating a health hazard, that my farm equipment was an eyesore. Every time, the inspector would come out, take one look around, and tell me everything was perfectly fine. After the 3rd or 4th time this happened, the inspector actually apologized and said Karen was clearly just trying to cause trouble. I should have seen what was coming, but I honestly never imagined anyone could be crazy enough to try what Karen eventually did. It was a Tuesday morning in October when everything went sideways. I was out in the far pasture fixing a section of fence that had gotten damaged in a storm the week before. It's peaceful work, and I was enjoying the crisp fall air when I heard a car coming up my private road. That was odd because hardly anyone comes out here unannounced. I looked up to see a black luxury SUV making its way toward my house, kicking up dust behind it. I could see there were several people inside, but I couldn't make out who they were from that distance. I figured it might be someone lost looking for directions, so I gathered up my tools and headed back toward the house. As I got closer, I could see 3 people standing around the SUV talking. There was a well-dressed couple, probably in their 40s, and a woman in a business suit holding a tablet and what looked like paperwork. The business suit woman spotted me first and started walking over with a confused look on her face. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you the caretaker here?" I was puzzled by the question. "No, I'm the owner. This is my ranch. Can I help you with something?" The woman looked even more confused now. She glanced back at her tablet, then at me again. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. I'm a real estate agent and we're here for the final walkthrough. This property was sold 2 weeks ago." I felt like someone had just dumped ice water over my head. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" The agent looked flustered now. "The property was sold in an all-cash deal. Very quick transaction. We're supposed to be doing the final inspection before the buyers take possession next week." "Ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, There's been some kind of massive misunderstanding. This ranch is not for sale. I own it, I live here, and I definitely haven't sold it to anyone." The couple had walked over by now and were listening to our conversation with growing alarm. The man spoke up first. "What exactly is going on here? We just paid a substantial sum for this property." The agent was frantically scrolling through her tablet. "Let me show you the listing," she said, turning the screen toward me. "See, this is definitely the right address." I stared at the screen in absolute shock. There was my ranch, photographed beautifully from what must have been a drone. The listing showed pictures of my house, my barns, my pastures, even my cattle. It was listed as sold for a price that made my jaw drop, easily double what the property was actually worth. "Who was the seller?" I asked, though I was starting to have a terrible suspicion. The agent scrolled through her information. The seller was listed as Kay Vance. She handled everything remotely, said she had health issues that prevented her from meeting in person. Very motivated seller, wanted to close as quickly as possible. Kay Vance. Karen's last name was Vance. I looked at the confused and increasingly angry buyers. "Folks, I am truly sorry you've been put in this position, but you've been the victims of fraud. This property belongs to me and has never been for sale. Someone has stolen your money." The wife looked like she was about to faint. "But we have contracts, we have deeds." "All forged," I said grimly. "I need to make some phone calls immediately. You should probably call your lawyer." After they left, I sat on my front porch trying to process what had just happened. Karen had somehow managed to list and sell my property without my knowledge or consent. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking, but I was way past the point of being impressed by her nerve. I drove over to Karen's house immediately. I found her in her perfect little garden, wearing designer clothes and tending to her prize-winning roses. When she saw me coming, she actually smiled. "Oh, hello there," she said with fake sweetness. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." "Karen, what the hell have you done?" She stood up and brushed dirt off her gardening gloves. "I did what needed to be done. I couldn't stand looking at that shabby property of yours any longer. It was dragging down the entire area. So I took matters into my own hands." I couldn't believe she was just openly admitting it. "You sold my ranch, my property, without my permission." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Karen said with a wave of her hand. "I found a legal loophole. Since your property was so poorly maintained and clearly abandoned, I was able to claim adverse possession and assume control of the sale. The new owners are a lovely couple from the city. They plan to build a proper estate." This was complete nonsense, of course. Adverse possession laws required decades of continuous occupation, and my ranch was clearly not abandoned. But Karen had obviously convinced herself that throwing around legal terms she didn't understand somehow justified what she'd done. "Karen," I said, fighting to keep my voice level, "what you've done is called fraud. You have committed multiple felonies." She laughed. "Oh, please, don't be so melodramatic. It's just some paperwork. You should be thanking me for helping you get out of this dump." I realized there was no point in trying to reason with her. "We'll see about that," I said, and headed home to start making phone calls. The first call was to my lawyer, a sharp woman who'd handled my grandfather's estate. When I explained what had happened, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said finally. "Your neighbor forged documents to sell your property to innocent buyers." "That's exactly what happened. This is one of the most brazen cases of real estate fraud I've ever heard of. We need to move fast to protect both you and those buyers." My lawyer immediately filed paperwork to stop any transfer of the deed and contacted the district attorney's office about criminal charges. She also advised me to call the county recorder's office to see if any fraudulent documents had been filed. That's when things got even worse. The clerk at the recorder's office, who'd known my grandparents for years, confirmed that a deed transfer had indeed been filed 2 weeks earlier. Someone using my grandfather's name had signed over the property to Karen, who had then immediately sold it to the buyers. "The signature doesn't look right to me," the clerk said, "but we don't usually verify signatures unless there's a dispute." "Well, there's definitely a dispute now," I told her. Over the next few days, the full scope of Karen's scheme became clear. She'd found a shady online real estate agent who didn't ask too many questions. She'd forged documents claiming to be acting on behalf of my deceased grandfather's estate. She'd even created fake health records explaining why I couldn't meet in person. The buyers, meanwhile, were understandably furious. They'd liquidated investments and taken out loans to buy what they thought was their dream property. Their lawyer was already preparing lawsuits against everyone involved. But Karen wasn't backing down. If anything, she seemed to think she was winning. She hired a lawyer and sent me a letter full of threats and baseless legal claims. She was demanding that I stop harassing her and the new owners of her property. That's when I knew it was time to go nuclear. My lawyer suggested we arrange a meeting on the property with all parties involved. We invited the defrauded buyers, their agent, Karen and her lawyer, and a certified land surveyor. I also called a reporter friend from the local newspaper and told her there was a story about protecting local heritage properties from fraud. On the day of the meeting, about 15 people gathered in front of my house. Karen showed up in her Mercedes, dressed like she was going to a country club board meeting. She looked supremely confident, like she thought this was all just a formality before she got her way. My lawyer had prepared a presentation that was like watching someone build a fortress out of facts. She started with the original land grant from the 1940s, then my great-grandfather's deed, my grandfather's will, decades of property tax receipts in my family's name, and documentation showing I'd been living on and maintaining the property for 3 years. Then came the bombshell. My lawyer presented a signed affidavit from the notary whose stamp had been used on the forged deed. He'd been in another state on the day of the supposed signing and had reported his stamp stolen months earlier. But the real knockout punch was the evidence from the district attorney's investigation. They'd traced the communications between Karen and the shady real estate agent, including emails where she explicitly discussed how to forge the documents. Karen's lawyer took one look at the evidence and immediately announced he was withdrawing from the case. The buyer's lawyer started taking notes for their lawsuit against Karen. The surveyor confirmed the property boundaries, and the reporter was scribbling furiously. The district attorney's investigator, who'd been watching from the back, stepped forward and arrested Karen on the spot for fraud, forgery, and theft by deception. The look on Karen's face as they put the handcuffs on was something I'll never forget. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed to realize that actions have consequences. She kept insisting that this was all a misunderstanding, that she was just trying to improve the neighborhood. "Ma'am," the investigator said as he led her away, "what you've done is steal someone's home and life savings. That's not improving anything." The aftermath was swift and severe. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the fraud scheme. Karen's husband, who apparently had no idea what she'd been up to, immediately filed for divorce. The buyers sued Karen for the return of their money plus damages, and her own house went up for sale to cover the legal fees. Karen eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a longer prison sentence, but she still served 18 months. The judge made it clear during sentencing that real estate fraud was a serious crime that destroyed people's lives and wouldn't be tolerated. The buyers got their money back, plus enough in damages to buy a different property. They actually thanked me for exposing the fraud, even though it cost them their dream of owning my ranch. As for me, the whole experience made me appreciate what I had even more. The community rallied around me in a way that reminded me why I'd chosen to live out here. Neighbors I barely knew stopped by to offer support and share their own stories about Karen's entitled behavior. 6 months later, Karen's house went to foreclosure auction. I bought the property for a fraction of what they paid for it, not because I needed the land, but because I wanted to make sure no one like Karen ever moved in next door again. I tore down that gaudy modern house and turned the land into additional pasture for my cattle. Where Karen's prize-winning rose garden used to be, I built a chicken coop. My rooster crows every morning right about where her bedroom window used to be. The peace I was looking for when I moved back to the ranch is finally truly mine. I've got my cattle, my horses, my land, and the knowledge that justice was served. Karen learned the hard way that you can't just take what doesn't belong to you, no matter how entitled you think you are. Sometimes I sit on my front porch in the evening watching the sunset over my pastures, and I think about my grandfather's words about being a steward for future generations. I protected this land not just for myself, but for my family's legacy and for everyone who believes that people's homes and heritage should be respected. Karen thought she could steamroll over a simple rancher with her city money and fake legal jargon. She found out the hard way that country folk know how to fight for what's theirs, and we don't give up easily. The best part is knowing that somewhere out there, Karen is probably still complaining about how unfair it all was, while I'm living peacefully on the land that belongs to me and always will. Sometimes the good guys really do win, and justice really is served. This whole experience taught me that standing up to entitled people isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about protecting everyone they might target next. Karen's fraud scheme would have continued if I hadn't fought back. Who knows how many other people she might have victimized. I'm proud that I stood my ground and saw it through to the end. My grandfather would have done the same thing, and I hope I honored his memory by protecting the land he loved so much. The ranch is secure, Karen is gone, and life is good. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some cattle to check on and a sunset to watch. That's what real country living is all about. Update, 2 years later. Karen's back and crazier than ever. Well, folks, I thought my story with Karen was over, but apparently she had other plans. It's been 2 years since my last post, and I figured you'd want to hear what's happened since then. First, the good news. Life on the ranch has been absolutely perfect. The extra pasture from Karen's old property has been amazing for my cattle operation. I've expanded the herd to about 50 head, and they're thriving on the additional grazing land. The chicken coop where her rose garden used to be has become legendary among my neighbors. My rooster starts crowing at 5 a.m. every morning, and several people have told me they can hear him from the road. I also met someone special. Her name is Sarah, and she's a veterinarian who specializes in large animals. She loves the ranch life, knows how to handle cattle, and rides better than I do. We got engaged last month, and she's moving in permanently next week. My grandfather would have loved her. But here's where things get interesting again. Karen got out of prison about 6 months ago after serving her full sentence. Apparently, she didn't get early release because she refused to participate in any rehabilitation programs and kept insisting she was the victim in the whole situation. I thought that would be the end of it. Karen and her ex-husband's divorce was finalized while she was in prison, and he got to keep most of their remaining assets since the fraud was entirely her doing. Last I heard, she'd moved in with some relatives in another state. I was wrong. 3 months ago, I started noticing strange things around the property. Small stuff at first. Gates left open that I was sure I'd closed, feed buckets moved around, that sort of thing. I chalked it up to forgetfulness or maybe some teenagers pulling pranks. Then my security cameras started catching movement at night. Just shadows mostly, but enough to make me uneasy. I upgraded my camera system and added motion sensors around the perimeter of the property. 2 weeks ago, I caught her. It was about 2 a.m. when my phone started buzzing with motion alerts. I looked at the camera feed and couldn't believe what I was seeing. Karen was on my property, dressed in dark clothes, carrying what looked like a bag of tools. She was heading toward my barn. I grabbed my shotgun and called the sheriff while I was getting dressed. When I got outside, I could see a flashlight moving around inside the barn where I keep my farm equipment. "Karen?" I shouted. "I know you're in there. The sheriff is on the way." The flashlight went out immediately. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then I heard her voice from inside the barn, and she sounded completely unhinged. "This is my land," she screamed. "You stole it from me. I'm taking back what's mine." When the deputies arrived, they found Karen trying to disable my tractor with a crowbar. She'd already done significant damage to the engine and hydraulic lines. She also had bolt cutters and had been working on cutting holes in my fence to let the cattle out. But here's the really crazy part. When they arrested her, she had a folder full of documents with her. Fake deeds, forged court orders, even a bogus letter claiming to be from the governor's office restoring her rightful ownership of my property. She'd apparently spent her time in prison learning to forge documents even better than before. The sheriff's deputy told me later that Karen honestly seemed to believe all her fake paperwork was real. She kept insisting they were arresting the wrong person and that I was the criminal trespasser. This time, the charges were even more serious. Breaking and entering, criminal mischief, violating her parole, and attempted theft of livestock. Her public defender tried to argue for a mental health evaluation, but the judge wasn't having it. This was Karen's second offense involving the same victim and the same property. The sentencing hearing was last week, and I was asked to give a victim impact statement. I talked about how Karen's actions had cost me thousands of dollars in equipment repairs and forced me to spend money on additional security measures. I also mentioned that her continued harassment was affecting my ability to enjoy my own property and plan for my future with Sarah. But what really seemed to get the judge's attention was when I explained that Karen's nighttime prowling had spooked my cattle and horses. One of my mares actually injured herself running into a fence when Karen's flashlight startled her. As a rancher, I have a responsibility to keep my animals safe, and Karen's behavior was making that impossible. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 3 years. He also issued a permanent restraining order that bars her from coming within 500 yards of my property for the rest of her life. During the hearing, something else interesting came out. Apparently, Karen had been living in a homeless shelter since getting out of prison. Her relatives had kicked her out after she started talking about reclaiming her ranch and showed them her collection of fake legal documents. She'd been obsessing over my property for months, planning this whole bizarre revenge scheme. The prosecutor said Karen had also been caught trying to file fraudulent liens against my property with the county clerk's office. Fortunately, the clerk remembered her from the first fraud case and immediately flagged the documents as suspicious. What really struck me during all this was how Karen had learned absolutely nothing from her first conviction. If anything, prison had made her more delusional and more determined. She genuinely seemed to believe that if she just tried hard enough, she could somehow make my ranch legally hers. The mental health evaluation did eventually happen and the results were sealed, but Karen's public defender mentioned that she'd been diagnosed with several personality disorders. The psychiatrist apparently recommended long-term treatment, but Karen refused to participate in any therapy programs. After the sentencing, I thought I'd feel relief, but mostly I just felt sad. Here was someone who'd thrown away her marriage, her home, her freedom, and probably her sanity, all because she couldn't accept that she didn't have the right to control other people's property. The financial impact on me was substantial. Between the equipment repairs, the upgraded security system, and the legal fees, Karen's latest stunt cost me nearly $15,000. I'm looking into a civil lawsuit to recover some of those costs, but honestly, I doubt she has any assets left to seize. On a more positive note, the whole ordeal brought Sarah and me closer together. She was amazing throughout the whole thing, helping me document the damage, dealing with insurance companies, and even staying up with me on the nights when I was too anxious to sleep. Having someone who understands ranch life and supports what I'm trying to build here has been incredible. The community response was even stronger this time than before. My neighbors organized a fundraiser to help cover my equipment repairs, and several local ranchers donated time and materials to help me upgrade my fencing. The local newspaper did another story about the importance of protecting rural properties from harassment, and the sheriff's department increased their patrols in our area. I've also been contacted by other property owners who've dealt with similar situations. Apparently, there's a whole network of people who've been victimized by individuals with personality disorders who become obsessed with other people's land or homes. It's more common than I ever realized. One thing this whole experience has taught me is the importance of documenting everything. My security cameras, detailed records of property damage, and comprehensive insurance coverage made all the difference in building a strong legal case. I'd encourage anyone dealing with property harassment to invest in good documentation systems. Looking forward, I feel more secure than ever. Karen is locked up for a long time. Sarah and I are planning our wedding for next spring, and the ranch is thriving. I'm even thinking about writing a book about the whole experience. Apparently, there's a market for stories about dealing with entitled neighbors and property fraud. The title of my book might be How to Defend Your Land from Crazy Neighbors, A Rancher's Guide to Legal Self-Defense. I figure if my story can help other people protect their property and recognize the warning signs of escalating harassment, then something good will have come out of all this craziness. The best part is that I finally feel like I can relax and enjoy my property without constantly looking over my shoulder. The restraining order means Karen can't legally come anywhere near here, and even if she gets out early for good behavior, she'll be on supervised parole for years. My grandfather always said that good fences make good neighbors, but sometimes you need good lawyers and security cameras too. I've got all three now, plus a woman who loves this land as much as I do, and a community that has my back. Karen spent years trying to take away my peace of mind and my connection to this land. In the end, all she accomplished was making both stronger. The ranch is more secure, my relationships are deeper, and my appreciation for what I have is greater than ever. As I'm writing this update, Sarah is out in the pasture checking on a pregnant heifer, my cattle are grazing peacefully on land that used to be Karen's fancy garden, and my rooster is preparing for his 5 a.m. wake-up call tomorrow morning. Life is good, Karen is gone for a long time, and justice has been served twice over. Sometimes the good guys really do win, and sometimes the bad guys keep digging their holes deeper until they can't climb out anymore. Karen chose to make this a war, and she lost decisively. Now I can finally focus on the things that really matter. My land, my animals, my future wife, and the peaceful life my grandfather always wanted for this place. The moral of the story remains the same. Respect other people's property, don't mess with ranchers, and karma has a way of catching up with entitled people who think the rules don't apply to them. Karen learned that lesson the hard way, twice, and she'll have plenty of time to think about it over the next few years. Thanks for following my story, everyone. Here's to peace, justice, and keeping entitled neighbors where they belong, far away from your property. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Someone posted a story earlier that was a bit too close to a true story that I was involved in. I previously shared it as a comment in another sub and thought I'd share the real story. This takes place before smartphones were omnipresent. I had a friend, we'll call him Bob, that was suspicious of his wife's social circle. One of her closest friends had been caught cheating and tried to throw her under the bus as well. Bob had no proof, and things settled down for a while. Bob was an IT professional and very, very good with PCs and networks. Nearly a year later, Bob's wife is acting shady again after her high school reunion. He confides in me and we talked through some scenarios. He jokingly mentioned a keylogger. He finally asked me to just drop it and most of all, don't tell anyone, not even your wife. A couple months pass and I'm up early, 5:30, 6, getting ready for work. I get a Facebook Messenger notification and see that I've been sent a link from Bob, but it's a group chat. It's literally everyone we know, her family, his family, our friends, strangers, and everyone. I didn't open it. It looked like a phishing link, even though it came from him, who's extremely cautious. A short while later, I get an email from Bob with some ominous, unsavory comments and the same link. It's a group email with the recipients open copied, his wife's work, her family, her friends, his family, other people I didn't know. I knew it was legitimate now, so I opened it. The link was to a hastily made website containing pictures and videos of his wife and another man. This wasn't hidden camera footage, it was screenshots including video screen captures. Weeks worth of screenshots. He had captioned each item with snarky comments and colorful names for his wife and her lover. It was an embarrassing amount of evidence. Videos of her masturbating with her lover, chat logs about how they can't wait to duck again, solo masturbation videos of her and him, tons of pictures, and the straw that broke the camel's back. Trash talking her husband to her lover, comments about how much bigger and better he was. Her efforts to stroke her lover's ego were especially hurtful. I dropped what I was doing and called him. He was drunk and combative. He had been up all night making the website and drowning in liquor. Not one good word to say about women in general. He was extremely emotional, but after some work I had convinced him to take the website down before it does irreparable damage to his marriage, their careers, and his children. As he's sobbing and logging in to remove the website, I hear loud yelling as she bursts into the room. A screaming match ensues and there's nothing I can do to pull him back. Apparently, her mother or sister saw the page, blew up her phone until she woke up and answered. She saw the website and went on the offensive. The phone call drops after 30 seconds of her screaming while Bob is calling her a whore and I can't contact him again. The website was still up for the rest of the day and he was kind enough to put a view counter on it. Hundreds of people watched her masturbating with a married former classmate. Bob had done his homework. He installed a keylogger that records the whole screen. When he was out, she would log into the PC and/or Facebook and play with her boyfriend. Bob had found her lover, his family, his wife, his wife's family, his job, etc., etc. All these people were included in the Facebook and email groups. I do not know what became of her lover and his marriage, but I do know what happened to Bob's life. His wife was desperate to make amends. She tried and offered everything. In the end, it was her comments about her lover and his prowess that were her undoing. Bob tried to take her back, even after all his friends and family had seen her naked and cheating. But he couldn't get over the comments about his manhood. Bob eventually left her, gained about 100 pounds, and then finally moved as far away as possible and became a horrible human being. I have no idea what he's doing now as he went scorched earth with most friendships and his family. She's gross and has a face shaped like a bowling ball now. Line forms at the rear. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So I served 20 years in the Air Force, and this story is from 1996. We were an atypical unit where our mission was always deployed. Not airframe related at all, but rather like the Army. We all trained with multiple weapons, we trained in convoy protocols, we set up our equipment and covered it all with camouflage netting, we dug our own foxholes, we pulled our own security, etc. You get the idea. All of this was as a self-supporting unit, all designed to be operated outside any base if need be. We had about 250 people at any given time, and like any unit, not everyone took it seriously. This story happened on the first 3 days of a deployment to Denmark for a NATO Partnership for Peace exercise when meant to 2-day convoys from our base. I didn't participate directly, but I heard firsthand from those who did as it was happening and heard and saw the fallout, which wasn't severe, but it was very satisfying for myself. I worked radar maintenance, and after all hands went on deck for our equipment set up on a cliff overlooking the North Sea, we split into 2 12-hour shifts for the rest of the deployment. I had known A, a senior airman, who outranked me since we were both in technical school 3 years prior, and this assignment was our second assignment, and it was nice to have a friend in the new unit, especially since it was my first deployment. We were both on night shift, as was A's girlfriend and future wife. KK wasn't in our work center, but whenever A and K had free time, they were together. We came off shift and hit breakfast, and Kay was complaining about getting reamed at shift change. Now Kay's supervisor was a somewhat crusty Master Sergeant V, and apparently he expected coffee to be ready by the time he arrived. Now most of us in the service love coffee. We need coffee. The 6 of us working nights in our work center went through 1 1/2 percolators, 30-cup reservoir, a night. Like, if you have ever read a Jack Reacher book, his coffee preferences was exactly what it was like. The problem was that Kay and the one co-worker she had on nights didn't drink coffee. So they didn't think of making it, and they also didn't think they should have to make coffee for someone else when they got 0 benefit. So that first breakfast after our night shifts began, they decided they would maliciously comply with MSGV's order to have coffee ready when he came on shift. The next night, they intentionally used the amount of coffee for a standard drip pot you'd use at home, despite every work center having the same 30-cup percolators. So when shift change happened, the first thing MSGV said was, "You better have coffee ready." And they both nodded and gave a "yes sir" and walked out the door, knowing they made the weakest brown water tea that would be considered undrinkable, and it would take another 15 minutes of anger-induced waiting by MSGV to have a decent cup of joe that he'd still have to make himself. Both A and myself were laughing when they relayed this to us at breakfast. That afternoon at shift change, Mesjit V tore into K and her coworker, and she came over to vent to A as soon as V was off shift. Apparently he raged about half of his 12-hour shift because a couple different people on day shift told K how angry and grumpy V was. Well, K told us he yelled loud enough that others came to see if there was a fight once she told V they weren't coffee drinkers so they didn't know how to use a percolator. He ended his second reaming with "figure it out" and stomped off. After venting and a hug and kiss from A, Kay said she'd make him a stronger pot of coffee, with a much different smile than her normal one. It didn't look sarcastic, but it was twice as big as normal, and I realized she was going to enjoy what she was going to do. So she went and filled the percolator basket to the brim with coffee, and turned it on. This was the beginning of a 12-hour shift, and as soon as it finished, she unplugged it and took it outside, and took the top off to cool in the chilly North Sea nighttime air. Once it was room temperature, she refilled the basket to the brim, put the lid on, and took it inside to restart the percolator using the coffee that was already in it. She got 4 cycles in that night, in between her duties, which were minimal as her system was rather new and much less labor-intensive than ours, and we were using our night shift to train us new guys, so we had much less free time. A and I found ourselves outside at shift change on purpose. We found a way to make ourselves busy and let the others do the shift briefing. About a minute or two after MSGV arrived, you could hear the faint shouting from across the dirt road and patch of field that separated our work center from the rest of the squadron. 2 minutes later, Kay and her coworker walked out with their heads down, and after about 20 paces turned to see if anyone was still watching. Then they started laughing hard enough to notice from just their silhouettes in the morning sun rising behind them. Kay came running to us, and I stepped back and let her tell A the story, which her coworker again relayed to me at breakfast. Here it is, still etched in my mind nearly 30 years later. MSGT V practically kicked in the door to the 580 shelter that functioned as their mobile work center. He immediately went to the coffee pot and scowled. "This better be stronger than yesterday." Kay just replied, "It should be," and turned to walk about before being angrily told, "Wait!" She was actually happy that he was already mad. He took a styrofoam cup and poured a dark black cup of coffee that looked like motor oil pouring out of an engine block that was several thousand miles past due for its change. It even had a faint burnt smell. V let out a, "What's this?" and took a sip and turned and sputtered it out of his mouth, out the still open door of the shelter. Well, most of it went out the door, but some dribbled out and hit his uniform shirt and pants. Good thing brown is one of the woodland camouflage colors. He raged for half a minute and stomped back and opened a coffee percolator to see the ground's practically overflowing basket. He raged some more about wasting resources, to order them out of his sight before he could do something he'd regret. After they walked out the door, he took his cup to toss out the undrinkable coffee and raged again in the amount of grounds at the bottom. And he still had to wait another 15 minutes to get a drinkable cup of joe. We were well outside the exercise wire before he could enjoy it. Well, A and I were back outside as soon the shift briefing ended that afternoon, waiting for K to come share the full fallout. Apparently Meskud V dropped the coffee percolator trying to empty it, and was so mad he didn't speak the rest of his shift until the afternoon shaft change briefing. But he told K and her coworker not to bother making coffee. She said good thing, because she had a fiber laxative she was going to put in the pot if she had to make it one more time. She said it with that same smile she had the first morning that made me decide I didn't want to get on her bad side. They all made up about it later, and Mesjit V even laughed about it during the post-deployment BBQ the night before we packed up to convoy home. Kay made sure she kept his beer stein full all night though, so it probably helped his mood. Anyway, thank you for watching.